God's presence requires a response.
5 a.m.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you today to 5 a.m. with Dr. Randy Turpin, and I have got a surprise for you today. Today, we're going to be in a conversation with my lovely daughter, Alycia Janelle. Hello, Alycia.
Hi, Daddy. Thank you for having me.
I am holding in my hand, I didn't even tell you this, I got this in the mail yesterday. It is a copy of your book, Daybreak. Daybreak by Henry Longfellow. It's a book of illustrated poetry, but don't forget the illustrated part. Illustrated by Alycia Janelle.
That's me.
That is you. This is amazing. I can't stop looking at it. I just have to say a few things about you before we talk a lot about the book. All right.
Okay.
By the way, the reason we're talking about the book is because I am hereby today declaring that Daybreak, this book of illustrated poetry, is of today the official book of illustrated poetry for the 5 a.m. podcast.
Oh.
Can you hear the applause from all over the land?
Yay. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm serious, because every line in this thing, this book resonates with the theme of this podcast, and I'll say more about that in a few minutes. But Alycia was born in Portland, Maine, in 1994, same place that Henry Longfellow was born. Of course, they weren't born in the same year.
No, a little bit of a gap between us.
But I think you say in the back when he was born.
Yes.
I don't know.
Top of my head.
1807. And he passed away in 1882. Of course, we lived in Portland, Maine. And do you remember the statue of Longfellow that was downtown Portland? It was a favorite gathering place for pigeons.
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember that. What does see is this rock that he used to sit on next to Portland Headlight, and just write poetry, just overlooking the ocean. And I just remember it's a little fenced off part of the grass that you can't go on, but you can look at the rock. And I always thought it was cool that he had a special spot that I couldn't sit at to write and create.
Forever, you have been not just an artist for as long as I can remember, but I never forget the day I think you checked out a book in the library about light and color.
Yeah.
You are actually a student of the science of light and color.
Yeah.
And it shows up in your work. Of course, you know I'm going to be biased. You are my daughter, after all. But more importantly than being a great artist, an illustrator as you are, and a student of light and color, you've been a follower of Jesus for a while. It shows.
Oh, I can't remember a time without him. Well, I accepted Jesus. Was it the day before my 3rd or 4th birthday? That time was
Your mom is a lot better at recalling those details than me. But yeah, I mean, throughout your entire life, you've been passionate in your pursuit of the Lord. And am I correct in saying that it's not just you living your parents' faith?
Oh, right. Yeah, definitely. I think you guys have really set the stage for my walk with the Lord. But I've had my own experiences, and man, you guys have definitely set me up for seeing God move in my life.
You've had quite an adventure in faith. You okay if I just jump in, or you want to say?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we won't go all the way through it. It's just there's up until we get to the part about the birds.
Yeah.
I have something I want to say about that. And then after that, I'd like to go over to the scene where there's the cemetery.
Okay.
A lot of parallels to the theme of 5 a.m. 5 a.m. is all, 5 a.m. is all about living the Christian life, how we live our life in this already but not yet kingdom of heaven. This is Daybreak by Henry Longfellow, just a few lines. A wind came up out of the sea and said, "O mist, make room for me." It held the ships and cried, "Sail on, ye mariners, the night is gone," and hurried landward far away, crying, "Awake, it is the day." Oh, folks, listen for some metaphorical parallels here. It said into the forest, "Shout, hang all your leafy banners out." It touched the wood bird's folded wing and said, "O bird, awake and sing." Now, I'm going to pause right here. Do you see anything metaphorical about any of this?
Well, I think the daybreak is something more than just something you see, but it's tangible because it's the wind moving. We see God, he's the wind. He moves us, and it might be an invisible force, but it is changing the environment around it, moving the mists and rustling the leaves and waking up the animals in the forest as well. And there's a response that this calls for from both the trees and the birds and even those at sea.
It represents like the moving of the Spirit, really.
Yeah.
Preparing us for not just preparing us for the coming kingdom, but the kingdom that's already breaking in upon us. And what really triggered my thinking that this poem in this book is almost a perfect parallel to matters of the kingdom is when I came to this part about the bird. It touched the wood bird's folded wing, this is the wind, and said, "O bird, awake and sing." Think of the Spirit of God moving upon us, just as the sun is about to fully break over the horizon, and saying, the Spirit of God saying to us, "Awake and sing." And it brings to mind the illustration I gave in the first episode. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that, but
yes.
Oh, you did.
Yes.
So you know the story I'm about to tell. Your mom and I were on a camping retreat, and in the middle of the night, what I thought was the middle of the night, I was awakened to the sound of a chorus of birds singing, and I thought, what on earth is going on? You know, don't they know it's the middle of the night? And just a short while, I saw, wait a minute, those birds are sensing something that I wasn't aware of. The sun started coming up. The birds were singing before it was time to sing, from my point of view. But that's the way it is in the Christian life. I think that even before we see full breakthrough, even before we see full daybreak, as you say here, we legitimately have a reason to shout and sing. And a few pages later, we get to the part with the cemetery, and it says, talking about the wind still, "It crossed the churchyard with a sigh and said, 'Not yet, in quiet lie.'" Now, everything else is responding. You're like, it's a new day, new day. It comes to the cemetery with a sigh. Oh, it's almost like, "I'm sorry, not quite yet." You know what you still have to lie there a little longer. It got me thinking about the already but not yet aspect of the kingdom of heaven, that we are enjoying really so much of God's kingdom right now. But this is just a taste of what is to come when Jesus returns in the fullness of his kingdom. Yeah. Even the dead in Christ will rise, and we're going to see the full manifestation of the kingdom of heaven. Now, when you selected this, you really weren't thinking about those parallels, were you?
No, I had already been drawing scenes from New England, and I started scrolling through Longfellow's poems. And I was like, I think this would be a very beautiful poem to illustrate, and I can picture what some of the lines might look like with an illustration alongside it. So I just thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, and you're actually looking at other poetry as well, to
Yes.
getting ready to put out illustrated books. And by the way, for those who are listening, I'm providing a link to this book if you want to acquire a copy in the description to this podcast episode. Now, Alycia, if you don't mind, I invite you to join in to whatever degree that you want to. You don't have to, but be so much enriched if you would jump in. I'm going to go into the word here a little bit. And the theme passage for this whole podcast is in Romans chapter 13. I keep coming back to it, and I probably will for however long we do this podcast. Romans 13, verse 11 and following says, knowing the time, now is the moment to awake from sleep. Now you're going to see here why I think Daybreak is so fitting as the official illustrated poetry book for the podcast, okay? Knowing the time, now is the moment to awake from sleep, for now our salvation is nearer than when we believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Therefore, let us take off the works of darkness. And the Greek actually is fling off, like you fling off a blanket
Right.
in the morning. Let us take off or fling off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Now, the last couple of episodes, I've done a lot of talking about this, and I've looked at the parallels between natural sleep and spiritual slumber. And I'm not going to repeat all of that here. Anybody that's interested in that can go back and listen to the last two episodes. But I do want to go back to Romans 11. Now, like I said, I've been looking at the parallels between natural sleep and spiritual slumber, and you can get a few lessons from that. But the book of Romans itself gives us the context of how to break the spirit of slumber. Actually, we see a hint of what causes it. But back in Romans 11, Paul is talking about how God so passionately pursued Israel and manifested his goodness for generations, trying to reach them, just calling out to them in grace. And in Romans 11, he says, God has not rejected his people. And it goes on to talk about how he, by grace, is still reaching to them. But he does speak about something that's not really a pleasant thought, and that is, after rejecting and neglecting and ignoring the grace of God repeatedly, something happened to Israel. And it's in Romans 11, verse 8, said, God has given them a spirit of stupor or slumber. It's translated into some translations as slumber. Eyes that would not see and ears that would not hear to this very day. You look and they go, yikes. It's not saying Jewish people can't be saved. Just talking about as a whole, as a nation, they had been rejecting grace. There were certainly a lot of Jewish people in Jesus' day and Paul's day, and Paul was a Jew himself, who were responding to grace, but masses of them were not, just like today. Not just among Jewish people, but so many people are not responding to the goodness of God, all of his goodness of reaching out, trying to reach us. And so there's a key here to not only to understanding and to understand what causes a spirit of slumber, but also how to break free from it. One of the major things that causes it is when we just keep ignoring, neglecting, or rejecting God's goodness, God's grace, his continual effort to try to reach us and to draw us close to himself. Well, then, what would you think then would be a way to break that spirit? Let's stop neglecting his grace. Let's stop ignoring his grace. Let's stop rejecting his grace. Just to have a resolve saying, I'm not going to be rejecting God's goodness anymore, or ignoring his goodness, or taking it for granted. A lot of people, the main problem is they're just procrastinating.
Yeah. Something I think is important to see is, like, in the slumber, God's still there. He's already been moving. It's just a matter of when we take action or open our eyes or start even looking for what he's doing. Yeah, because I think sometimes we can just get into that lull of just day after day in our routine and then realize, like, what am I doing? I really need to actively engage. God's presence requires a response, and it's not like a strict, like, there must be a response, but it's just a cause and effect, especially when we see his goodness, when we finally, it clicks in our heads.
What you're saying is so true. It's not that God really needs to do anything more. I mean, he's already there. He's never left us. He doesn't leave us. He's there. A lot of times, the breakthroughs we need, it's just him waiting for us to respond to what he's already doing or already has done. There is another passage along these same lines. It's in Ephesians 5. Boy, this would take an entire episode just to talk about, really. but it says, awake you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. And he goes on talking about, see then that you walk carefully, not as fools, but as wise men, making the most of the time, making most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And I'm reading quickly because I'm getting to this part. Do not be drunk with wine, for that is reckless living, but be filled with the Spirit.
Okay, I see a parallel in the following verse between the poem, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs amongst yourself and make music to the Lord in your hearts. Like, just like that poem, that movement, the moving of the Holy Spirit, that's the response, the singing and a hymn and that. So I think that's cool. So when we say that the moving of the Holy Spirit requires a response, I know it talks about singing psalms and proclaiming the goodness of God, but what does that practically look like in our day-to-day?
That's a real good question. I'm sure after more thought, I'll come up with a better answer to that. But if the Spirit of God is moving upon us, he's not always necessarily trying to point out something that's wrong with us. Sometimes he just wants to have fellowship with us. But at the same time, I think we need to ask the question, Lord, what do you want to do in my life? And I can guarantee you this, that whatever he says in response to that, whatever he reveals, it's going to lead to something good. Yeah. You know, it's not always God. It never is him condemning us. It's always him drawing us closer to him. Just like we were talking earlier about Israel, how he had been just going after Israel. I mean, ever since the Garden of Eden, God has been pursuing mankind, and he's always been moving toward people, not away from people. And I mean, there's times when, after a lot of rebellion, you may see a temporary distancing, but it's him waiting for a readiness on our part. So I would just say anybody that is even sensing a little bit of this awareness, a renewed awareness of his goodness, don't just take that for granted. It is him knocking at the door. He really wants to come in. He wants to have close fellowship with us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
It's responding with our yes. I mean, the whole passage we were looking at that there in Romans was about grace, that this is not, whereas Israel had been so caught up in their works righteousness, what Paul was really pointing to was a remnant that was being saved by grace. That speaks of his favor.
Yeah. Something I realized in Ephesians 5, going back there, the order, awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light, which I find really interesting because you heard the birds before the sunrise. You know, they woke up and then the light came and they could see clearly. I just find that interesting too. That order.
They were singing before the light came.
Yeah. And then Christ will give you light. He'll show the way. I just find that interesting.
So the awakening comes before the full light of dawn.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I want to thank you for being here with me today, Alycia.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dad.
Just want to remind those who are listening that if you want a copy of this book, Daybreak, the official illustrated poetry book for this podcast, Daybreak by Henry Longfellow, illustrated by Alycia Janelle. Go into the description to this episode. The link is there. All right. That wraps it up today. I'm a little reluctant to announce what we're doing next time because I keep changing direction from week to week on what we're going to do. Have to just kind of go with the wind, with the flow of the Spirit on it. But thank you for joining me today for 5 a.m. And remember this, that no matter how dark it seems, a new day is breaking in. The kingdom of heaven is near.